Hello and welcome to Modkit Mayhem. This week we carry on the Tiger one in part 4. Yeah, no, 4 parts. I thought I was going to do it in 2. Anyway, so this week we'll be painting the Tiger, the base colour, and then next week, which will be the last one, will be the weathering, and it'll be completely done then, which will be great. Woo! This week I took the liberty of undercoating the Tiger first. I didn't really do a video on that because there was no point. The only thing new was I used a can of Army Painter, which I haven't used before, and it actually worked okay. On the whole, 99%, it actually did cover the model well. It took a while because there's lots of niches and angles and nooks in the Tiger, so it takes a bit of manoeuvring to get a decent coverage, and even then you still are left with some places where you'd end up overspraying trying to get them, so you have to go back with some black paint and just pick those little areas out. My plan was to use some newly purchased life colour paints. I've seen some good things on these. Unfortunately, there was something I didn't predict. You'll see further on in the video what went wrong. And also, although this is going to be for the weathering part, I'm going to use some Winsor & Newton oils to try and do some sort of pin washes. Yeah, see how that goes. I went around some of the details and just painted up where the crocodile clips had been attached. If there was any areas left, I just gave them a little quick cover of black paint. I capped off the wire cables and the exhaust shrouds, just because it would be a lot easier to paint them separate. I tried to put on as much as I could on the model without it becoming impossible to paint. Even after that, there's still a few things that you have to leave off, like the cupola. I couldn't think of a way to really do it without getting in there and painting it properly, so I kept that off and then glued that on after I painted the inside of it white. I used Vallejo Model Air for the black, and here you see all the elements that I've left off for painting separate. So I started with the life colour, and what I didn't predict was the reaction it would have with the Ultimate airbrush thinner. Now, it may be just me, and maybe I've not cleaned out the airbrush properly. I don't know. I don't think it was that. I think it's more to do with the thinner, because when I mixed the thinner with the paint, initially it worked, but over time I just noticed there was kind of like specks, almost skin forming, and the airbrush clogged up very quick. It almost became impossible to spray it. I was cleaning every sort of third spray, and I realised then that I should have got the life colour thinner and used that instead. So I decided I'd put that on hold and leave that for another model and just go back to my MIG paints, because I've got the proprietary thinner for them. Just use what I knew worked, and so I started off spraying with that, and it worked fine. Like with all acrylics, you have to do it in stages. So first of all, you just put the lightest sort of spray on you can, and then gradually build it up in layers. So you're looking probably 4 to 5 different passes of the same area, gradually building up the layers, and that seems to work fine. You get a better coat with that. Now, I don't claim to be an expert in airbrushing. In fact, quite the opposite. It's something that's very new to me, and it does make me very nervous, because you've put all that effort into a kit and it could put, it'd be so easy to ruin it. And the thought of that makes me feel sick when you're starting out. But if you don't practice and you don't give it a go, you're never going to learn, and you're never going to get any better. So with that mantra, I decided to just keep going and sort of work past that fear. And every time I do something with an airbrush, I try and push the boundaries a little bit. So up to now, I've just done basic schemes, just one colour. So this one I'm going to do a camouflage scheme, and also I decided I wanted to highlight areas after. You'll see in the video later where I use a lighter paint, and just keep pushing the boundaries so you get more comfortable airbrushing. I think that's a good way of doing it. Don't expect too much from yourself straight away, because you'll end up being disappointed. It's something that just takes, like with anything, takes practice, and the more you do it, the better and the more confident you feel. So I keep spraying each area, and our Tiger has, unlike a Panther, which has pretty much a lot less angles, Tiger has a lot more different shapes and angles, so it takes a lot more work to sort of keep or spray each individual angle, as it were. So you have to work away, at sections as you go, side, front, lower parts. And just slowly work my way around, do one face, move on to the next face, do that, then you can go back to the other and just keep putting on layers of paint. I think that's the thing with the airbrush, is to get comfortable with where the pressure works for you in terms of how much paint's coming out, and that's one of the trickiest bits, at least for me. That's what I find, that if you rush at all, more paint will come out and you'll ruin the sort of the section. So you have to be very careful. I mean, there's a little bit of leeway and you don't want to panic too much, but you've just got to find that sweet spot where the trigger is, and that'll get you the right amount of coat, and just keep doing that over and over and over again. I think a thing that would help me massively if I could find the right mix ratio for thinner and whatever paint I'm using, and then mix that up in a batch beforehand so that I'm not mixing as I go, because that is so random. You know, I'm just doing it by eye every time, and the sort of variables of it going wrong, either too thin, too thick, does affect your confidence and makes the job a lot longer. So I think I need to sort of look into that in the future if I'm going to do a lot more airbrushing. And it did take a long time. It was, you know, was a fair bit of work. But on the plus side, that's extra hours, you know, practicing with an airbrush, which is what you need to get good. I speeded up the video here because you don't want to watch it. It's really boring. Onto the turret. Again, the turret's a bit tricky because it's got rounded shapes, so you have to kind of work the angles on that, and then that huge big slab of a roof. Yeah, so just take your time. You can see I'm doing thin layers over and over and over again. And don't worry if a little bit of extra paint comes out. By 3 or 4 coats later, you're not going to see it. So even if you make a little bit of a mistake, you still got a bit of leeway to fix it. And then onto the details, the exhaust shrouds. So I took a chance here and decided to speed things up and spray the wheels. That shows how much more confident I was at this point because I've done so much spraying. I took the wheel block and just again built up layers, sprayed each wheel in a round circular motion, and over time the paint built up and you know, it looked quite good. And then I figured if there was any overspray, I'd paint it under the rubber black anyway, and anything else would get hidden in the dirt and grime of the tracks anyway. So you can afford to be a bit more messy on this one because you can hide any sort of horrors, as it were, with mud and dust. And so then I moved on to highlighting. I took a lighter shade that comes in the MIG set, and I just mixed that up and then applied it to the centres of panels and skirting and anywhere that was sort of needed highlighting. Also the centre of the wheels, just gave them a little spray, and instantly it worked. You could tell straight away that it was doing something, and it looked a lot better, gave a lot more depth to the actual shape of the vehicle. So it's worth doing. And again, this is a new step for me. I haven't done this, so just every time sort of incremental steps of achievement in terms of how I do things. That way, you know, you'll get better over time. I mean, this is the first time I've used actually Vallejo air in the airbrush, and you know, that's supposed to be sprayed straight, and on the whole it worked perfectly. You'll see it on the tracks in a bit. Right, onto masking. Now, I'd seen other people using this sort of technique, so I thought I'd give it a go, and that's blue tack. Again, something I've never done before. I took a pack of blue tack and then just shaped out the markings. To be honest, the marking reference is not absolutely brilliant on the instructions, so you kind of have to make it up a little bit, and especially on the other side. Once I'd done it, I realised that I'd maybe missed certain angles, so in future I'll have to make sure that I be a bit more aware of that. Once I'd got the blue tack into sort of snakes and then into the shape of where the camera went, I used masking tape to fill the gaps, and that sticks straight down because it's sticky against sticky, and it's quite messy to get off at the end, but you're very unlikely to get any you know, spray contaminating the other areas. I mean, it looks crazy messy when you've done it, but trust me, it did work. So you just have to work your way around. I just ripped off smaller strips. You kind of spot how it rips in certain ways, and then you can just apply it. Then it's a lot easier, and you use a lot less of the tape. Make sure that it's not overlapping the actual blue tack. Using MIG ammo German brown, red brown, I used that to spray on the camo, and I don't know whether it's my paint or whether it's supposed to be this colour, but it looks incredibly orange, and I didn't really think about it until after I'd sort of looked at it, and I think it actually gets lighter. You know, you're seeing it going now and it sort of looks orange. It didn't to me when I was painting it, but it looks even lighter now, and I'm not sure whether A, my paint's old and it's changed colour over time, or it's supposed to be this colour and then when you start putting the washes on it actually dulls it down, and the same with the weathering. That's all I can hope. Once I've done it, I'm not going back. I've painted that, but in retrospect I'd have probably painted it a darker brown. Moving on to the tracks. So I wasn't sure how I was going to do this, so I kind of sat and thought about it, and I figured in the end not to worry about it too much, so I just took some sand and just sprayed that over it straight from the bottle, which is the first time I've used that, which like I said earlier, and it worked fine. So I gave the tracks a good covering and then tried to get into all the areas I could so that it covered everything. And I wasn't too worried about it going over on the wheels and stuff because, like I said, you know, you can hide that in kind of some of the weathering effects later. So it was just to give it a good covering and get rid of any black. And then once I'd done that, I took a sanding block and just quickly rubbed over the top surfaces of the paint to take off some sand and take it back to the undercoat. And then my plan is to next week dry brush that with some silver, so there's some silver coming through on the actual track that's actually hitting the ground, and then within the recesses I'll put sort of more soil and grit, so it looks like it's a dry terrain, but there's still, you know, a bit of wear on the tracks. It worked well. It looks, you know, even as it is now, it looks quite good, but it'll look really good when it starts sort of weathering it up. So masking time to take it off, and you don't rush this one because you're quite easy to damage what you've already sprayed, and in a couple places I did chip it slightly, but I just touched that up with some extra paint. And apart from it being a little bit over orange for my liking, it looked alright, you know, looked quite cool. It's quite an interesting pattern. A shame I didn't have any reference for the other side, but you know, at the end of the day, it's the budget beast. I've had to make things up all the way through this. It's a good idea to get tweezers and pick away any of the blue tack that's a little bit tricky, if you can't get your fingers into that sort of little area. Then after that I removed the sponge that was masking the radiator fans. And there we have it. There's the initial camouflage scheme. It'll look a lot different once it's weathered. Next was just to file out some of the areas where the pins from the tracks go, because they'd covered up in paint inside, so I had to take some of that paint off so that they'd fit properly. I just used a file and then filed out on the excess paint, and they slotted in fine then. After that, moved on to the hatches. Just used the Vallejo off-white, and that worked fine for the hatches parts. I mean, I'll put a little wash on them after anyway, just to tone them down a bit. But it's quite a nice look, you know, the sort of camo look, and then the white of inside, good contrast. After that, probably the last step for this week was to paint the tyres, and I just used the Vallejo black tyre paint, which comes in the tracks and wheels set, and works fine for this. So it's just a bit painstaking, but it's worth it. The weathering will cover a lot of this anyway, so it's just initial covering, so you don't even have to be that precise. I mean, try your best, but you know, it's still going to be very toned down once the dust goes on there. And that's it. Done for this week. It's been a challenge, more on the airbrush side of things, and it's not the easiest thing to show while videoing. My sort of spraying station's quite sort of separate. It's a bit more tricky. I haven't worked out the best way to film those, you know, mixing of paint and how I actually apply it. And it's so noisy you can't do any talk. You can't speak while you're doing it anyway, so you never hear anything. But again, something that I need to kind of think about in future if I'm going to do more airbrushing. To be honest though, it's a bit crazy me trying to explain it because I'm still working it out myself, and I can in no way claim to be an expert whatsoever. I'm just kind of working as I go. So at the end of the day, I can tell you what what I've found and what went wrong and what went right, and you know, and hopefully you can pick up some things from that. But on the whole, it's pretty much wing it. Anyway, I think I just got away with it, so I'm quite looking forward to weathering next week. It's going to be really good. Stick around for that if you can. I hope you enjoyed that, and it was interesting. Thanks very much for watching. Like and subscribe below, that helps out massively. Give me a thumbs up if you can, that really helps out. Take care, cheers, ta-ra, bye.